It seems like we're in another season of allegations made against leadership around abuse. And so today I'm going to talk about how should the church respond to allegations of abuse when it's from leadership. Now, I want to acknowledge that allegations are really difficult. It can be destabilizing for everybody, and it can feel like it's particularly harmful or particularly difficult when it's from somebody that is a well-known leader, as in the case of the allegations that are made recently about Grammy Award winning artist and pastor Donnie McClurkin. These allegations can shake the church. And so I'm going to talk today about how can the church respond when there's an allegation of abuse that is made. Now, sometimes this is what we often see, especially if it's somebody that is prominent. It's immediate disbelief, and it happens across the board. I've been working with survivors for many years, and I have seen this too often. So that's why I'm here teaching. Church, this is how you can respond. Immediate disbelief happens sometimes, and there's a immediate protection of reputation of the person and also of the institution. And then there is isolation of the person who speaks up. There often is very little in terms of, I don't know, many churches seem to not have policy around how to protect the victim. So whenever an allegations are made against well-known figure, the question is rarely how do we protect the vulnerable. It often is reputational damage, institutional damage. There is an automatic thing that goes into protecting that, and victims are often left without protection, without advocacy, without support. Now, we at Wounds to Scars work with adult survivors of childhood trauma and women who experience abuse. And I've been doing this work personally for over 20 years. I write courses for survivors of abuse, for pastors to know how to respond to victims, the language to use, because over the years of listening to hundreds of women, of people indeed, what we hear often is the harm that is done in those kind of contexts versus a place that is safe for victims to disclose abuse. Oftentimes people are not believed. The allegation is spiritualized, or victims are silenced or bullied even, or ostracized. While the legal process is happening, victims are often ostracized. Families are often ostracized. Victims and families often don't have a place to be. So you might see me glance down. I'm looking at my notes. So how can a church respond to an allegation while the legal processes are unfolding? So I'm not speaking as a commentator. I'm speaking as someone who I've sat with survivors, as I say, for over 20 years. I've sat with the people, with the people who have experienced the harm, in Christian settings, who have lost their faith as a result of how this is happening, how this is done. So here are three common threads that we keep seeing repeated when an allegation is made. These are three common. Grooming. Many Christians don't believe that adults can be groomed, or many Christians don't know how grooming happen in their church, whether or not how to spot it. And if you've been on this channel, there are many videos around that. So the groomer will do, there's a gradual erosion of boundaries that will happen where the groomer, the perpetrator, is using that against the victim. And it happens in many different ways. And some work really fast, some work a little bit slower. I've known situations where the grooming have happened over years of that gradual erosion of boundaries, whether it's through turning up, phone calls, conversations, things that are said, in different ways. Another thing that we see is spiritual language. The groomer will use spiritual language to create trust and isolate the victim. So the victim becomes dependent on the perpetrator, on the groomer, the person that is grooming. So spiritual dependence, or financial dependence, or they become confidant. We see that a lot. So grooming on the surface can sometimes look like spiritual care from the outside. Even the person experiencing it might feel like they've been cared for spiritually. And because of that, it can take people a while to realize that, oh, this is what's happening. So And then there's the abuse phase. Now, abuse is not just physical or indeed sexual. There's abuse when there's a power imbalance, when people that are in power use that power in ways that are to get themselves their own to for their own gain. So there's manipulation, there's coercion, um, and in that space, people fear speaking up because they fear the consequences. They fear the consequences for themselves, and oftentimes the person who is grooming will often make them feel like, if you speak up, I am going to face consequences that is going to be your fault. And so this is some that's why these are some of the things that we need to be aware of. Number three, spiritual abuse happen in these relationships too. And so spiritual abuse is when somebody in power uses scriptural authority to control somebody else and frame it in the way that this is God's will. Sometimes it's used, the name of God is used in many situations to create harm for many people. So what this does is it silences the victim, because if it's somebody in spiritual authority, they have unquestionable authority. We just don't question them. We think, oh, well, if pastor says this, then it must be so. If the leader says this, then it must be so. And by this time, the groomer will equate obedience to them as obedience to God. So you can see already how there's this loss of personhood, a loss of autonomy. The person who has been groomed will start to second guess themselves. They'll start to think, I must be wrong. And so sometimes they'll give in to situations that they do not want to give into. And so it's really important for the church to know this. So I'm doing this for church because we see a pattern of failure in churches that we really want to help church to stop, to stop this cycle of failure, of failing victims. So here is where we see the failures happen. Victims are silenced. Victims are asked to be quiet, the reputational harm. Be patient. And victims are rushed to forgiveness prematurely. Now, as Christians, we believe in forgiveness, but we believe that's a process that somebody walked through at their own time and pace with God. So start to ask the hard questions, church. Ask, why is the alleged perpetrator surrounded with care while the person who discloses left alone? Because that's what often happens. Why are they left alone? So in these moments, neutrality, sometimes if you're in leadership, you have to develop the ability to do that, to be able to listen impartially and to carry out the processes that are necessary for the protection of the victim. If there's a crime being committed, to report it. But one of the things that we can't do while we're doing that is silencing victims and give them an automatic message that they're not believed. So what a better way? Here's a better way. What should the church do? Here's some things that you can do. You can hear without judgment. You can listen and reserve judgment. And I appreciate that this is sometimes things that we have to learn how to do. And it's absolutely okay if you do not know how to listen without judgment. I think it's really honorable to say, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to listen to somebody who is disclosing without trying to do reputational harm for the church. My immediate response is protection of the church and that institutional reputational harm. It's okay to be able to say that. In my spaces, I create spaces for people to say that without them being judged. But as long as you're not wanting to stay in that space, we want to move on, where we can get to the place where my automatic dial is not reputational damage. We can listen to victims without undermining them, or without undermining, the legal processes that have to happen when a crime has been committed. We can take victims seriously while that is happening. And we can let victims know that they won't be punished for speaking up. They won't be punished for speaking up. We can work to build and create an environment in church where people feel safe enough to share. If you are listening and you have disclosed, and that's not what you got, you did not get protection. You were told, you were rushed to forgiveness prematurely. You were silenced. If this is your story, I'm going to put the link to our WhatsApp group below this video where we create safe spaces for people to heal. Church, here's something else that you can do. You can provide advocacy support for victims. And that might be cultural, language, all the barriers that, think about the barriers that people who are disclosing potentially could face when they disclose and due process has to happen. You can support people through therapy. You can provide counseling. Now, you may not have to pay, but you can direct them to places where they can get therapy and can start their work of healing. You can provide protection from retaliation within the community. You can ensure that somebody can disclose and they would not lose their community as a result of disclosure. A cautionary tale. I want to end with a cautionary tale for leaders. You know, Paul said this. He said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." He also said, "And I keep my body under subjection, lest after preaching to others, I myself have become a castaway." We want to clearly help leaders, people that are in leadership, to do that thing around keeping their body under subjection, so we can start to hear less allegations. We can start to minimize harm that happens to people in situations where people are hurtful, people are hurt. Another cautionary tale, I'm going to end with this one. The higher and the bigger the platform, the higher and the bigger your ministry is growing, your teaching, your wisdom, the higher and bigger the platform, the greater the accountability. The greater the accountability. And church, it shouldn't be the higher and bigger the platform, the greater the protection. If we can love people enough to hold them accountable, we might start to see less allegations made. We might start to hear victims tell completely different stories of disclosures in Christian settings.